Hello, brothers and sisters, family and friends. I want to share a story with you, and uh, normally you see me doing a message, but I've been told many times that I could probably write a book about all my life experiences and things that took place and my whole life story. Well, I just don't have the time or the energy to do that. But what I'm going to try to do is share with you my life from the time I was born till the time I was graduated from high school. We'll start off there. The story is, if I were to give a name to this book, it'd be called Duke of Cabbagetown. And how that name came about was that my mother and father, of course my name is Frank B.Holmes, but my mother and father called me Duke. Every kid back in those days had a nickname. Well, that was my nickname because they used to say that I had a D diaper, a do diaper a lot, and when I was a baby. So the name stuck with me. It started off by calling me Dookie, and then it turned into Duke. So that's what everybody calls me, that are my close friends and some of the people I graduated from high school with. So the story would be called Duke of Cabbagetown. I was born during, I was one of those war babies. I was born during the World War II, and I was born December 19th, 1943, at Grady Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was long before it was a high-rise. And it was the main hospital for Atlanta. Nearly everybody went there, just about. And I was born there in 1943. I had two wonderful grandparents and aunts and uncles everywhere, and many cousins, but I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the main places that I grew up was a place called Cabbagetown. That's why I'm calling this Duke of Cabbagetown, because I'm from Cabbagetown. I'm one of those homeboys from Cabbagetown. So that's why I'm calling it Duke of Cabbagetown. Well, when I was born with a heart murmur and had some little bit of problem there, and but outgrew it, and we lived in Atlanta many times of different places, but mostly we'd always end up back in Cabbagetown. And the reason why that is because my grandmother and grandfather lived in this little shotgun house. A shotgun house is those houses they put in mill villages that on one side it had 3 rooms, and on the other side it had 3 rooms, and you could just go straight through it, and one door and out the back door. That's why they called it a shotgun house. And they lived, believe it or not, my grandmother lived there 67 years. 67 years. All the grandchildren, all the children I know were born while they were living in a house. And like I said, my father was in the war when I was born, and many times he wondered if I was his child. He really did. He didn't, because I was born at a certain time, and it happened to be that I was born in December. So, make a long story short, during that period of time, we were just coming out of the Depression. And nobody owned homes back in those days. Everybody rented. And especially with us, we had to have a low rental property or something that we could afford, because when you got 3 boys, that's a lot of mouths to feed, especially after the Depression. And it was, I'm one of 3 boys. I'm the middle one. It was, I'm Duke. Doodlebug was the oldest, and Woody was the youngest. Duke, Doodlebug, and Woody. That's what we were known as, our Doodlebug, Duke, and Woody. So that was our names. But anyway, to make a long story short again, we grew up in a time when poverty was at its worst, and we didn't know we were poor, but we can find out later on that we were, and but it's better just not to know it, just to grow up that way. And you know, I'll never forget when I was in high school, and I'll go back to when I was younger, but I thought that being rich was having carpet in your home. I never had seen a carpet in a house unless it was in a rich person's house. Nobody had carpet wherever I went or rented. It was either a cement floor or it was a linoleum floor. You know what a linoleum is, don't you? And so that's what, or a wood floor. That's it. Never saw a carpet on the floor until I went into a person's house that I thought was rich. So that's just the way we grew up. But we ended up moving in a place called Capital Homes back in those days. And Capital Homes was a low housing project, a low income housing project. They didn't have DFACs or federal assistance back in those days, except to had certain places where you could go and rent at a cheaper rate because you couldn't afford the higher rates. And we were one of those. My daddy was a truck driver, and he most of his life, and didn't make a whole lot of money, but he made enough to take care of us. And he was always constantly changing jobs, but his biggest job was a truck driver. He worked for the Ford company, but he was always a truck driver. So we lived in these in this place called Capital Homes, and what they were brick. Had a brick outside, but on the inside, everything was cement block and cement walls. Built in usually there was a living room and 2 bedrooms and a small kitchen. Upstairs was the 2 bedroom, downstairs was the living room, and behind the stairwell was the kitchen. And that's where we lived most of the time. I do remember living in a boarding house one time. I'll never forget that as long as I lived. Was always afraid to go in the basement because we thought that's where the devil lived. And go in the basement. And this was when I remember it because I was like 3 years old, 2 or 3 years old, and it was up in, I think it was on Lucky Street in Atlanta, Georgia. Lived there for a few times, and I have some pictures of me and my brothers in little cowboy outfits in front of that boarding house, and they're on Facebook if you want to look them up. But I remember that, remember it vividly. And then I remember a time living in Capital Homes when I was 3 years old. My mother used to use this neutralizer that was a permanent type stuff that you put on your hair to help curl it and stuff like that. And she made the mistake of putting it in a milk bottle, empty milk bottle, and put it in the refrigerator to keep it from clouding up so she could use it again back in, and nobody wasted nothing. Well, unfortunately, it was a hot summer day, and I was very thirsty, so I run into the house and grabbed that bottle up, and before I knew it, I done drank the bottle of neutralizer. So I got poisoned. Well, my father worked for Pittsburgh Plate Glass back in those days, driving a truck, delivery truck, and my mother picked me up, ran out to the main road, which we were off of. The main road was Memorial Drive back then, and I think it's Highway 29 now or something. 78. It's Highway 78 is what it is now. But it's Memorial Drive in Atlanta, Georgia. And my daddy happened to be driving down the road in front, and she waved him down, and he picked us up to the hospital, and of course they pumped my stomach out and hospitalized me for a week, and I finally got through that. I'll never forget riding bicycles and the projects, and these buildings were set in there diagonally, and you could always walk through the walkways from one building to the next, and you could walk for like 5 miles. That's how long this project was. But we'd ride bicycles in there, and we'd build these little ramps and different things like that. I've got so many cuts on my head and been sewn up so many times, it's unreal. In fact, my head's been sewed up 16 times. If you were to shave my head, it looked like a South Georgia road map with all the scars on it. We were active children back in those days, simply because my mother and father both had to work. Most of the time, we took care of ourselves. We were left to take care of ourselves, or we were left at my grandmother's down in Cabbagetown. Again, if my mother needed a babysitter, my grandmother was there, always. And she'd always feed us, and she'd give us a warm bath and different things of that nature. And so if we were living somewhere outside of Cabbagetown, we was always living in Cabbagetown because of my grandmother and grandfather. My grandmother's name was Emmer Patterson. Everybody called her Mama Lee. And my grandfather was Frank Patterson, whom I'm named after, and everybody called him Papa. And we were close-knit. Everybody was close back in those days, and some of us who are still living. I'm the oldest living of the Patterson clan now. The oldest living of the Patterson clan. And that says a lot. My grandmother lived to be 95 years of age. What a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I was blessed to be able to preach her service. And what a blessing that was. But back to my childhood. So we lived in Cabbagetown, I think, till it was like maybe 5 years old. I think I remember that correctly. And we ended up living in Cabbagetown Homes for a little while. I don't think Woody remembers that, but I do. And we were constantly always moving, because guess what? When you can't pay your rent, you have to get out. And that's what happened a lot of time. My daddy couldn't pay the rent, so we'd move somewhere else. And it just would skip out in the middle of the night. I can't begin to tell you how many times that happened in our life as a child. And so here we are, 5 years old, and I remember the Easter egg hunts. I remember all those things, thinking that that's what Easter was all about. I remember the Santa Claus thing, and hated Christmas because all these kids getting these wonderful gifts and presents, and all we got was like one gift at Christmas time, and that was during my birthday, so I got the same gift for my birthday and my Christmas. I never understood why those children down the street, Santa Claus loved them more and gave them more. That's why it's wrong to tell children that there's a Santa Claus. One of the reasons why. But I'll never forget, we lived in Cabbagetown Homes and lived in Capitol Homes, and I can't remember a house we lived in during that time, but there was a time when we had to move to Texas. Didn't know why, didn't understand why. I didn't know until I became an adult why we moved to Grapevine, Texas. My daddy, I was 6 years old, Woody was 4, and Doolbug was 8. I think it was 8 or 9 years old. But we moved to Grapevine, Texas. My dad got a job as a construction worker, and he did that a lot too, and working on building in a high-rise building. He was an iron worker. He worked on iron and stuff like that. So of all places we found a place to live, Daddy found this ranch that was for rent, a ranch house that was for rent. And of all places where it was in Grapevine, Texas, and it was on Tom Mix's old ranch. Do you know who Tom Mix is? Tom Mix was a great Western silent Western cowboy star. He was a silent cowboy star. Everybody knows who Tom Mix is. In fact, Bob Steele was one of his, he played in a lot of his movies. But anyway, we lived on his ranch, and by then it was owned by a man named Mr. Carl. That's what we called him. He had horses on it. I think it was something like, if I remember correctly, it was like 80-something acres. Had horses on it, chickens, cows, you name it. It had it all. We were in hog heaven as kids living on a ranch. And having horses that we could ride and little animals to play with. And, oh, man, that was a great time. I'll never forget that as long as I live. That's one of my favorite childhood memories was living in Grapevine, Texas. Come to find out, though, after we became adults, why we moved to Grapevine, Texas. Well, my father, who was he was fleet champion in the Navy. I don't know if I've told you that, but he boxed, and he was a mean dude. He ended up boxing in the sports arena when he came home out of the Navy, and everybody in Cabbagetown knew my dad because my daddy would whip your rear end. You hear what I'm saying? He was a tough dude. Unfortunately, he had a reputation, and he was always fighting in bars and different things of that nature. So one day, he was in a bar, or one evening he was in a bar, and a guy started a fight with him, and my daddy almost beat him to death. And my daddy was they was going to get him for not manslaughter, but what it is, it's assault with intent to kill or something like that. But anyway, so what my daddy did, my daddy ran, and he took us with him, took Mama with him, and we moved to Texas. So we were there at least a year. Oh, what a wonderful time. I'll never forget it snowing in Texas, not rare, and Grapevine is near Dallas, I believe it is, but it snowed real heavy that winter, and that winter it was at Christmas time and different things like that, and me getting my Red Ryder BB gun, the first one I ever had, and my double bubble gum and a big box. Remember the swell is what it was, not double bubble, swell, where they wrapped it up in little twists like that, and a whole box full of it. Man, we blew bubbles for a year out of that box of bubble gum. I think Mama would give us a piece every day until they finally ran out. And but I got a BB gun, and I'll never forget that we always played with firecrackers. I always stove my fingers up from letting the firecrackers go off in my hand. And well, it was out in the field during the winter time, and it was after Christmas, and everything was dry as a bone. Just as far as you could see where we lived, you couldn't see the next house where we lived. That's how much acreage of land it was. So we was out in the pasture, and I was shooting the BB gun. It was lighting firecrackers too. Holding the gun in one hand, trying to light the firecracker and throw it. Well, instead of throwing the firecracker, I threw the match. I finally got rid of the firecracker, but the match landed out there in the pasture, and it caught the whole pasture on fire, and I burned up about 10 acres of land. Well, we ran back to the house, and they had to get firefighters from all over the county to come in and put that brush fire out and put the prairie fire out, and oh man, what a mess. But anyway, I dropped my Red Ryder BB gun. My dad comes home from work. He said, "All right, boys, who started that fire?" No, Dad, we were just out there shooting firecrackers. Nobody started the fire. We were just outside playing. He said, "Well, no, that wasn't the story. The story was we lied to him. That's what it was. We lied to him. So no, we weren't out there, Dad." And then my daddy always tell that you were lying. Or you were not telling the story as it was truthful. He said, I know you were out there, and he had my BB gun behind his back, and he brings it out, and the stock is burnt, and the forehand it was burnt, and plastic was burnt and melted on it. And we finally confessed, and boy, he spanked us. I mean, he wore us out. But there was no getting around that. My BB gun was evidence. But I still shot that old BB gun until I'll never forget, until I think I kept that thing until we finally moved from Texas. But things like that happen in a child's life, and don't shoot your eye out. Well, I almost shot my mother's eye out. It was one summer, it was awfully hot. I always shoot my BB gun. Everybody did, and especially living on a ranch. And I was shooting at the garbage cans. Unfortunately, the garbage can from the back porch, on the back side of that, was the outhouse. Didn't know it, but my mother was in the outhouse. And she comes out, and I shoot that garbage can, and I hit it, and one of the BBs come up and caught her in the chin. Woo, Lord have mercy. I thought my mama was going to kill me, but she didn't. She loved me, and of course said, it's okay, Duke, it's okay, don't worry about it. I'm all right, it didn't hurt that bad. But she said, don't let your daddy hear about this. Don't tell Daddy nothing about this. He said, but don't be shooting a gun out near the garbage cans of the outhouse anymore, or around the house. So we did that, and many times we had so many incidents and things happen in our life, and I'll never forget out there in Grapevine, Texas, that we were all taking a picture on Big Red, which was the biggest horse. I forget, it was one of them 12 to 14 hand horses that stood way up there. And Daddy had put us all on it to take our picture. And Woody was in the middle, and we started all to fall. And Woody fell first, and I think Dubé fell on top of him, and he hit his head and caused a concussion. And Woody had headaches for the longest after that. And then one day we were out in the back, and the cow was and the bull was in the fence and going into the barn, and Woody wanted to get up on the fence and look at the bull and the cow, and he got up there and had barbed wire. I always put barbed wire around the top of the fence, off, you know that, to keep the cows and the horses and the bulls from jumping on the fence and keep any of them from climbing over. Well, the bull come charging at the fence, and Woody jumped back, and he caught his finger on the barbed wire, and it ripped the tip of his finger off. And they found his finger, and he went to the hospital. And of course, they doctored it up. They couldn't save it, but anyway, I'll never forget, they put that little finger in a little jar, one of them cherry jars, and put formaldehyde in it, and Woody still got that finger. I think it's dried up. But those are the type of things that happened to us when we were living in Grapevine, Texas. I hope you find this story interesting, and I'll take up where I left off the next visit. God bless you, my friends, and I hope you enjoy this message. And if you do, share it with somebody. And I'll see you next time.